as we are just working with any demand function. So let's see how the residual demands look. So I'm going to divide this into two, so I'm going to put here residual demand. Okay, I'm going to put here the graph of the residual demand. Okay, but let's first see how it goes. So I'm going to have the residual demand of the two farms in order to operate. And we're going to have the three conditions that we have just put. So if P1 is greater than P2, okay, from 1 gets 0. So if it's charging the high price, it gets 0. If it's charging the low price, it gets the whole market demand. Q sub T, the market demand. And if they are the same, they split the market. One half. The residual demand for from 2 is going to be the opposite. It's going to be the reflection of this. So let me start by writing the conditions in the same order as I have here. So first P1 greater than P2, second P1 less than P2, and finally 1 equal to P2. Okay, so if from 2 is charging the lower price, you get the whole market demand. Charging the highest price, get 0, and if not, okay. So there we have the two residual demands. And you can see here quite clearly that there's a discontinuity. What I mean by a discontinuity? That depending on whether the price charged by the firm that we are analyzing, so here we are here with the residual demand from 1, we are thinking from the perspective of firm 1. So if the price of that firm is above or below P2, okay, the residual demand looks very different. It's 0 or it's the total demand. So there's a discontinuity. So it's not going to be smooth as it was in the case of the Cournot model. This discontinuity is going to play an important role when determining the residual, the Birth response function of the firms, and therefore when we find the equilibrium of this market. So everything is going to be driven by this feature. And it's again, it's something that arises due to the fact that the goods are homogeneous and the consumers only care about the price of the goods by the firm that charges the lowest. Let's do the residual demand. So I'm going to do it just for one firm here. Let's say firm 1. So this means that I'm going to have here Q1. I'm going to draw the input function. I'm going to do the cost. So that's the demand function. Actually, to be consistent, we call the demand function capital Q super demand. This demand function is capital E super D. Okay, the total demand function. Okay, so it's the same as we have. You bear with me? So now what I want to do is to draw this residual demand. So this residual demand of firm 1. Okay. The residual demand is important because it's what determines how the phone is going to behave, how it's going to respond optimally to whatever the other phone is said. Okay. And you can see here that everything what we have said about the residual demand of one depends on P2. And I don't have P2 here in the axis. I don't have this P2 in the graph. So this means that I need to choose, I need to do it, the residual demand for different P2s. So different P2s, different values of the price chosen by the other firm, it's going to give rise to different demands. Okay? Because I'm not measuring P2 in any of the two axes, it means that the residual demand is going to be different for each. Okay, so I'm going to choose one P2. Okay? And for concreteness, I'm going to call this P2 P2 tilde. Okay? So that's P2. So nothing about this P2, one specific P2 like here. We are thinking about the demand function of the Cournot model that we analyzed last class. Remember that was the 1000 and 2000p. So the prices were ranging from 0 to 1. And think about P2 being something like 0.8 or 0.6 or any possible price between 0 and the intersects with the vertical. You with me? So now let's think about the demands. So I have P1 in the vertical axis, so this means here that I'm varying P1. So I look here, if P1 is greater than P2, so it's greater than P2 tilde, then the demand is going to be 0. So this means that for all those prices here, so with this thick line, I'm graphing the residual demand. Okay? And what this means is that, so this is 0. If the price, if P1 is greater than P2 tilde, then it's going to be 0. Everybody with me? Okay. So this is going to be tilde. Okay. Now I go to this part. If P1 is below P2, my graph below P2 tilde, then the residual demand is going to be the total market demand. So it's going to be this line over here. This is it. So here we have our residual demand. And if they are equal, they split the market equally. So this is the total quantity that is demanded. So 1/2 of this is going to be here. I'm picking here the first half, okay, you can pick the second one, you can pick any point. Which part you pick is not important, important is that it's half. This is arbitrary, the model is silent regarding which part you pick. This is also part. Okay, so there we have the residual demand. And you can see very clearly now the discontinuity. The demand, the residual demand is this function until it arrives at this price, then it jumps here, and then jumps here. Okay. So it has that discontinuity, and this is going to affect the best response function of the firms. Okay. Obviously, when you change P2, okay, the whole demand, the residual demand is going to change. If you pick a higher price, then this line is going to expand, this line is going to decrease, and this line is going to decrease. The opposite if you go down. Okay.
And that line is still QR1, right? The one that you shaded like that, the one for the half QD, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Correct. I try to make it with this line. All is part of the. So this is the one that we have here. So we have these 3 parts. That's why we have 1. Okay. questions? Alright, we are almost done now because now with this, having understood this well, we can derive the best response functions, and once we have the best response functions, we can derive the equilibrium. That was our initial question. So let's derive the best response function, and to do that I'm going to do a graph of the best response function, studied with the econ model, okay? But now in the price. Let's add. Right, so best response functions. Response function. Let me split this into two as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a graph here. This graph, as I mentioned, is going to be in the space of prices because firms are competing in prices. So in the Cournot model, I did two graphs. One where the residual demand and another one with Q1 and Q2. So here we're going to have, instead of Q1 and Q2, we're going to have P1 and P2. Okay, that are the two variables in which the firms are competing. Okay. And here I'm going to put the economic reasoning that is going to be driving how we draw this graph. Okay, so this is how this is going to work. We're going to draw this line. It's going to be the 45-degree line. Okay, so this is the line at which P1 equals P2. Okay, so that's a 45-degree line. So in this line, what I measure here in P2 is equal to P1. It's going to be important in this model. And again, the reason why it's important because the first ones don't want to sell the price, don't want to be undercut. If they get undercut, okay, they get zero demand, they get discontinued. The other thing I want to keep in mind in this graph are the marginal costs. So, marginal costs. 1, marginal cost of firm 2, and the marginal cost of the two firms are going to be the same here. It's always going to be the same. Okay. So now what we're going to do, so now I'm going to start with the analysis here. I'm going to be writing it down so that you can have it. Okay? We're going to start deriving the best response function. So we're going to start with the form 1. So take form 1. What is the best response function? The best response function tells what's the best that form 1 can do to maximize their own profits, given what the other firm is choosing. Okay, so I need to see what the other firm is doing. So suppose that firm 2 sets P2 equals to P2 is copied right there. Okay. So choose one price, any price. So the only thing that I've been a bit careful here that is above the marginal cost. Okay, why? Because if it is below the marginal cost, then the firms are going to incur losses. So they can always avoid those losses by exiting the market. So they're never going to choose a price below the marginal cost. That's why I'm choosing prices above the marginal cost. Okay, I call this P tilde just to be general, but it's basically any price. Okay, so let's locate that price here. So now we can use the 45-degree line, okay, and project that price to the horizontal axis. And now I have that this P2 tilde in the horizontal axis, okay, where I'm measuring P1. So that's the reason why I project it, because I want to see what is the best response for firm 1. And firm 1 is choosing P1, it's not choosing P2. Okay? Okay, so take firm 1, suppose that from 2 sets P2 tilde, okay? What's the best from 1 can be? And again, by best, what I mean is the best to maximize their own profit, maximize the profit of firm 1. So let me ask you, what's the best that firm 1 can do? What price should firm 1 choose if firm 2 is setting P2 tilde?
Will it have to be the same one, the same price?
Well, let's think about it. If it is the same price, if firm 1 chooses P1 equals to P2 tilde, so the price equals to this, you go back to the residual demands that we derive and describe in the previous board, and then they're going to split the market equally. So that's fine. That's not that bad. Okay. Can firm 1 do better than that?
They should
Sorry.
slightly under P2.
Under P2. If it chooses a price below P2, so here we have P1, so if it chooses a word below P2, what's going to happen is that as long as it is above the marginal cost, okay, it's going to get the whole market. Now it's not going to get half, it's going to get the whole market. And therefore it has to be better because obviously it's charging price above the marginal cost, so the profits are going to increase. Okay, so that's certainly better than choosing P21. How lower or how high should that P1 be? So here we have P1, this axis, here I have P2. What we have just said is that, okay, if it sets a price below P2 tilde, it's going to be better. It's going to maximize profit. Which price? So we have all these prices. Obviously it has to be above the marginal cost, but which of these prices?
Like right below P2? I'm sorry.
Exactly. Right below P2. So what one can do, okay, choose P1 equals to tilde, okay, minus, okay, let's put here the pen. Like one second. So let's assume that is P1. Let's call this P1 tilde, okay, because it's the price at which from 1 is react to P2 tilde. That P1 tilde is going to be.
My screen is really blurry. What's the word in the parentheses?
Penny. I tried to write penny here. Okay, it's just you can think about 1 cent. It's the minimum increment at which the firms can choose prices. Minus like 1. But so in parentheses now it says 1 cent. Okay, and this is P1 here. Okay, so this means that if firm 1 chooses P2, so P2 is this line over here, then from 1 the best you can do is to choose P1, that is this line over here. So they intersect at this point, so let's call this point A. Okay. So that point A is 1 point in the best response function of firm 1. Okay. It's the best response to that price. Okay. Is that clear? Well, we are now essentially done because we can choose any other price. For example, we can choose here P2 hat, okay? And we can do the same analysis, okay? And we are going to get there is that the best response function is going to be exactly 1 cent to the left of the 45-degree line. Okay? And you can continue that way, deriving points on the best response function. So the best response function is going to be a line, it's going to go parallel to the 45-degree line above, so 1 cent to the left. And this is going to be the best response function from 1. Okay. What happens at the marginal cost? So, if P2 is equal to marginal cost 2, okay, then what should do P1 from 1?
Would you want to like just set it equal and then take half instead of losing out on profits by setting lower the marginal cost?
Exactly. Now I don't want to choose a price below, okay, because if I do the same I get negative profit. But I can still choose P1. It was the first thing that I was that one of you suggested to me to choose the same price. So I can still choose P1 equals to okay, and get half. So this means that this best response function goes above the 45-degree line in a parallel way, 1 cent to the left, until it reaches this point. Let's call this point B. Okay. Point B is a point where the two marginal costs intersect with the 45-degree line. At point B, the best response function coincides with point B, and it finished there because it never wants to set the price below, because they can always obtain zero profit by exiting the market. So they're not going to price below the marginal cost. Okay?
Is that point B on the 45-degree line, or is it 1 cent above 45?
No, the point B is on the 45-degree line. Is the marginal costs are equal here. Is the Coulomb model. Okay, so this means that the point B is going to be on the 45-degree line, and it's going to be also on the best response function. So the best response function, when it reaches that line, marginal cost 1, then it jumps to the best response function. If you are doing it cent by cent, it jumps. If you are doing it continuously, as I did here, it goes smoothly, okay? But it goes through that point. It's the only point at which the best response functions intersect the 45-degree line. Okay?
So if I'm reading that correctly, it's not perfectly linear then? Like it'll be linear up until it reaches marginal cost. It's a 45-degree line.
Correct. More questions or comments? All right. So
Also, the best response function of the second firm, would it be like slightly under the 45-degree line?
exactly right. That was the next step. Just mentioning. If we do the same with firm 2, okay, then firm 2 will always want to set a price that is going to be slightly below the P1 that firm 1 is setting. Okay, we can do the same thing. Start with P1 here, go to the 45-degree line, then firm 2 would like to set one price 1 cent below. So this means that the best response function of firm 1 is going to be something like 1 cent. So now you can see what these discontinuities in the residual demand generate on the best response functions. So the best response functions are only going to intersect at this point B. Okay, so this means if we are finding the equilibrium of this model, the only possible equilibrium is pricing at the marginal cost. Okay, and this point over here, this point B, is going to be the Bertrand. Questions? Let me leave the graph for a couple more minutes, but let me put it here. Summarize. So the unique Bertrand equilibrium, that is the Nash equilibrium of this Bertrand gain, is 1 to marginal cost. The two marginal costs are the same, so marginal cost. And this is obviously the same as the perfectly competitive outcome. Same as perfect competition. So we get that the equilibrium in the Bertrand model, the unique equilibrium. So the only thing that we can expect from this model, if this varies in this notion of Nash equilibrium, is pricing at the marginal cost, which is the same as perfect competition. Alright, and now I'm moving to the second part of the second topic, that is the comparison between the Bertrand and the Monod model that we analyzed on the previous class. So this is very counterintuitive. Why? Because perfect competition, okay, obviously is efficient, okay, and the outcome of the Bertrand model is going to be efficient. But in perfect competition, the way we rationalize is that we have either a very large number of firms or a lot of competition, or the potential threat of entry by a large number of firms. Okay. Here we don't have anything of that. We have just two firms and there's no entry. Okay. Nevertheless, we obtain the same equilibrium. And it's counterintuitive in the sense that if we were to have just one firm choosing prices, we are back to the monopoly case, and it's going to generate this huge dead-weight loss, this large triangle that we have analyzed several times. But if we increase the number of firms from 1 to 2, we are back to perfect competition. And it's intuitive in that sense, that there's no smooth transition from the monopoly to the perfect competition outcome. That didn't happen in the Cournot model. In the Cournot model, what we saw is that we have two firms competing quantities, okay? It was going to generate an inefficient outcome, and the amount produced on aggregate by the two firms was going to be greater than the one produced by the monopoly, but less than competition. Actually, what I told you, although I didn't derive it, was that as we increase the number of firms in the Cournot model from 2 to 3 to 4, the total quantity produced in the market starts increasing and starts converging to the perfectly competitive outcome. In particular, with the number of firms goes to infinity, okay, the outcome of the Cournot model converges to the outcome of the perfect competition. And in that sense, the Cournot model was very intuitive, was the opposite as here. The catch of the Cournot model is that in the Cournot model, firms were adjusting quantities, so they were competing in quantities. And we tend to think that that's not very intuitive, in the sense that when we go to real world markets, we observe much more often that firms vary their prices than vary their quantities. Yes, I showed you one example about competition in quantities with this the schedule of flights in the FK last class. Okay, so yes, sometimes the firms do compete in quantities and they do vary, but it's much less often than varying prices. If you go to the airline industry, you actually see that prices vary every day, sometimes within the same day for the same firm. So there's a lot of variation of prices. Nevertheless, the scheduling of the flights, okay, you need to wait several weeks, sometimes several months, in order for them to change or something very big happening in the market. So, in summary, it's much more intuitive to observe firms changing prices than changing quantities. Okay? So we believe that in that sense, the Bertrand model is more intuitive because firms are choosing prices. Nevertheless, the outcome that we get is very counterintuitive. We get perfect competition. If we go to the Cournot model, the outcome that we get is very intuitive, but we think that it's very counterintuitive, the fact that firms are choosing quantities. So we are left with this trade-off between the two models that we are not going to be able to reconcile using homogeneous product. The main reason why we obtain this result here is the fact that products are homogeneous. Okay? In real world, okay, if you think about the airline market, cereal, you think about any product like the supermarket, there's going to be heterogeneity. There's going to be each of the products are not going to be identical from the perspective of the consumer. They do care about brands, they do care about other characteristics. Once you allow for product differentiation in the Bertrand model, this result of the unique Bertrand equilibrium at the marginal cost breaks down. Okay? And we get much more intuitive results. We're not going to see that particularly in this class because it gets a bit complicated, but we are going to see some examples and some models about product differentiation among monopolistic competition. So this result that we have just obtained is going to allow us to set up things for what we are going to start discussing after midterm 2. That is going to be this topic of monopolistic competition and product differentiation. Okay, where we are going to allow each of the firms, even if they are competing with others, to have certain characteristics that make their products unique. Okay. Questions or comments?
So in the Bertrand model, if the number of firms is greater than just 2, does the quantity in the market increase, or do they just keep splitting up in smaller and smaller divisions?
They start splitting it into smaller chunks. If you have 3 firms, I'm going to split it into 3, 4, 5. But they're going to still be pricing there. So as long as you continue under the assumptions of the Bertrand model and with this homogeneity of products, okay, you're always going to end up there. Okay, so this is not a feature of having just 2 firms. Okay, and that's also a counterintuitive result. With increase the amount of competition, nothing happens. Okay. We believe that most of the markets that we observe, that's not true. And again, why is that happening? Well, because in most of those markets, the products are not homogeneous. Okay. But nevertheless, it was important to analyze this model because it gave us some intuition that we are going to start using later on in the other models that we are going to consider. For example, the hoteling model that is going to be the first formal model of differentiation that we are going to see after the Okay. More questions or comments? Alright. So the next thing I want to do is to briefly discuss the Stackelberg model. So I'm not going to go about the details, how to solve it, because it will probably take me 40 or 50 minutes to do that. I will need to spend part of the next class, and I would like to leave the next class for you for the midterm and giving you new material. But I will still like to discuss the main intuition of the Stackelberg model and some of the outcomes of the observed. So let me do that now, and then we can discuss the case. So this is going to be the Stackelberg model. And this is sometimes called the leader-follower model. Leader. Follower model. So it's essentially the same model as the Cournot model. So firms are going to be competing in quantities. We're going to have all the assumptions of the Cournot model, in particular the product. The main difference is that we're going to have a leader and we're going to have a follower. Okay, so you can think about the timing using the following line. Okay, so this is going to be timing. First, we're going to have from 1 here, okay? Because this is similar to a Coulomb model, functions are going to be choosing quantity. So from 1 is going to choose Q1. Then in the second stage, if you like, from 2, it's going to choose Q2, and then the outcomes are released. So functions get the okay. And then the work ends. So they're going to play this game just once. So that's the timing. So here nothing happens in this last step. It's just I'm trying to say that okay, after from 2 chooses quantity 2, the profits are from get their profits. Okay, so really there are 2 stages, here and here. And this stage happens after the second one. So that's why we have this time. So that's the setup. Is this clear? Okay. So the question that I want to ask you is the following: what's more profitable? What generates greater profits? Being from 1 or being from 2? Being the leader or being the follower?
Would it be from 1?
Why, Claudia, do you think it's from 1?
Because they're like in terms of timing, they're the first ones to pick the price and quantity.
Correct. And how does that translate in being more profitable?
Because they're the first ones there, so they're the ones that pretty much set the stage for whoever follows.
There's a sense in what you're saying is correct, and let me explain it to you, and tell me if this is more or less what you have in mind. It's going to be correct. So from 1, okay, so the leader. So what's more profitable? Okay, so being the leader. Being from 1 is going to be more profitable, and the reason is the following. Okay, what you said, Claudia, was to set the stage, basically to set the ground, to set up the rules. The key here is that they're going to be playing this game just once. So after the profit are realized, okay, then from 1 does not play again. So the world ends in a sense. Okay, well, it ends according to the game as we have it. Okay, although this feature is much more general, but in this simple game, it's just a one-shot game. So if from 1 sets Q1, okay, we know what from 2 is going to do. Why? Because we already learned the Coulomb model. So in this stage, okay, after from 1 has set Q1, from 2 what is going to do? Okay, from 2 is going to maximize profit. Okay, how is going to do that? It's going to behave as a monopoly with the residual demand. Okay, and what's the residual demand? The residual demand from 2 going to be the total demand. Here you have the Q1 that from 1 played. This is how it's set in the stage. By producing some Q1, okay, you are conditioning what from 2 can and what cannot do. Regardless of what from 2 from 2 does, from 1 cannot change Q1 because I already played. So from 2 says, okay, well, tough luck. If it plays a very high quantity, the best thing I can do is to maximize my profit by doing this. And if you play a very low quantity, the same thing. So there's nothing much that it can do. On the other hand, from 1 has many more options, okay, because from 1 knows that by choosing this Q1 is going to condition what from 2 does. So now from 1 can affect what from 2 is going to do, because from 1 knows that from 2 is going to behave in this way. Okay, so the key concept from this model is this commitment that the from 1 is doing. Okay, it's commitment in the sense that is playing as a leader, is playing first. Okay, so it's choosing a quantity, okay, and then it cannot change that quantity. So because of that, it's conditioning the quantity that Form 2 can choose. Okay. So that's one of the features that we are going to obtain from this model, that it's more profitable to be the leader than the follower. Okay. Another feature that is not as obvious as this one, in order to see the following feature, you need to solve the model, which I'm not going to do. This is not going to do it here. Happy to discuss it in office hours. Are interested is that the total quantity produced under Stackelberg is going to be greater than the total quantity produced under Cournot. So this is Cournot. This is Stackelberg. Why this? This is not obvious. This is an outcome that you need to derive. So I do not expect that you understand this, but I am telling you this so that you are aware. Why this is important? This is important because this is related to the deadweight loss. Okay? So what we saw is that the quantity of Cournot was greater than the monopoly. Okay, but lower than the perfect competition. So the perfect competition is going to be over here. So this means that the Stackelberg gets a bit closer to competition. Okay, so consumers are going to be better off under the Stackelberg model than under the Cournot model. And this has implications for regulation and for intervention in the state. Okay. Questions or comments? So this was everything what I wanted to say about the Cournot model. You can solve the model. If you are interested, you can use the same tools that I give you for the Cournot model. So it's actually not that complicated. Just take a bit of a couple of chords and some time. So it will take more or less the same amount of time that it took me to write the Cournot model. And so that's why I'm not doing here. So it's not more complicated. But because it takes a bit more time, and I think that here you capture the main intuition, I'm not doing. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you to derive the Stackelberg model in the exam, and I'm not going to ask questions about the Stackelberg model in the exams. Okay. Final questions, comments?
What differentiates why a duopoly would follow the Stackelberg model or not model?
Yeah, it depends. It depends a bit on the industry and what type of features we are seeing. This is related to the question of, okay, well, all these models that we are using are abstractions, are not really how we observe reality. And the reason why we do these models is because we want to be able to say something that is a bit more general, that does not apply only to one case, to one particular, say, real world scenario, to one particular case analysis that we are analyzing in the second part of the lectures. And different models are going to have different parts that might be relevant if one is asking different type of questions. For example, let me put things a bit more concrete. We are talking about scheduling of flights in the airports, okay? Then we are talking about the quantity there. So the Cournot model is going to be more intuitive. It's going to give us more insight if you are asking about that type of question than the virtual model or the Stackelberg model. Okay, but maybe you told me, okay, well, but maybe we have a big player in this industry, and maybe American Airlines is the firm that has the largest market share and is moving first. Okay, maybe this means that we are not only looking at quantities, but we are looking at the timing. The one firm move first and move. So in that case, the Stackelberg model might be more relevant. Or maybe we are talking about not scheduling of flights, but about how firms are setting their prices for their flights, okay, in a given week. And maybe in that case, they are competing on prices, and maybe the virtual model is more relevant. I don't think that the Bertrand model is the model for that particular game because there's going to be product differentiation, something that we have not covered. But this is more or less how you answer the question that you have just posed me. You try to think about the model. What are the main features? Okay, competing prices, competing quality, being a static model, having product differentiation, not having product differentiation, having many firms, two firms. Remember we saw the model of the fringe, the monopoly. And you try to see, okay, well, which of these models is closer to the situation that we are trying to analyze, trying to say something specific. Maybe you're reading a newspaper and trying to say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense what this person is telling me. Or maybe you come up with some idea and you say, okay, well, I would like to see what is the economic intuition behind this, what is the right model. And the right model is going to depend on which type of question you're going to be answered. There are always going to be some simplifications that you need to do, so there is not going to be perfect. How good is going to be the model to answer that question? Well, it depends on how well those assumptions fit one in the setting. And there are going to be some scenarios, some real world cases where the models are going to do a better job, and some cases where the models are not going to do a good job. And one of the things that I want you to take from this class is that. First, how you can use some of these tools from the theory that sometimes looks completely abstract and apply it. And hopefully, in many of the cases that I have given you, you have been able to see how they fit. Obviously, I have chosen the cases purposely for that objective. But you can see that. And second, and that's why sometimes I have some questions that are a bit more open-ended, that it asks you to think in economic terms, even if when one is not directly applying a model, some equations, or some graph analysis. Because I want you to internalize this concept about marginal decisions, marginal cost, and how you can tell a bit more than just pure intuition. To go from pure intuition to economic intuition, which might make a difference for the analysis. Okay, but I know that I expanded a bit more than the question was asked, but I think that's a good question, and it's part of what I want you to take from the class. So hopefully they'll give you an overview. More comments or questions? All right, so let's move to the case. So the case is going to be this case about pricing. An album that is called A Lost Point. Okay. So it's not going to be a direct application of the Bertrand model or the Stackelberg model that we saw today, but it's about pricing, and it's pricing with monopoly power. So in that sense, it is going to be related. That's why I put it for today's class. And at the moment that this was implemented, it was quite an innovative way of pricing, so it got a lot of attention, and that's why we are picking this article from 2007. So who can summarize what's happening in this case?
Basically, Radiohead released an album, and as opposed to selling by iTunes or CDs, which back then was very common, they just released it online for anyone to download, and you would pay however much money you wanted. So basically a little bit of price discrimination, but mainly just pay what you want.
I like what you said about price discrimination. So what do you have in mind when you're saying a little bit about price discrimination?
So I guess in theory it would be a form of price discrimination because customers are paying exactly what they're willing to pay. So in that sense they would in theory capture more of the demand but there's also the reality that a lot of people who might have been willing to pay for it would just not pay anything, just get it for free.
Right. That's exactly right. I put here B because you are already responding part of the question that is asking in part B. So in part B, what I asked you is how I'm going to put this like this. I mean, pricing in this particular way, okay, can increase profits. Profits for the firm. Here the firm is ready. Okay. So how this why? So you might see this article in NPR. This article maybe in 2007, and you can react and say, oh well, this is quite innovative. You might start discussing about Radiohead. You might start discussing, okay, how this might affect consumers, blah blah blah. Or you might also tell us, okay, well, is this just like something benign that the firm is doing? Could it be some reason behind that might actually increase their own profits? Okay, something else. And this is the part that we are interested in economically. And I think that what you just said, John, goes on the points. I think that's one of the main points of how this might increase profits. Okay, so I need to put what was that you said. Okay, so price discrimination. Okay. So the idea here. Let me just rephrase what he has just said, so we are on the same page. A price, quantities, okay, we're going to have a demand. For marginal cost. So, to see this point a bit more clearly, let's start with the pricing of this type of goods before Radiohead come up with this idea. How this was done. Okay, so how, in other words, how copyright affects this market. Okay. So how copyright affects this market?
So does it add a fixed cost since traditionally they have to go through what it talked about in the article, like a person that handles all the copyright stuff?
So you are thinking, Ian, about say the record company, the middleman?
Yeah, and then that obviously would get like taken away with them putting it up on their own. But I feel like copyrights would like kind of cost them money.
That's correct. That's just going to be one particular party in the market that is going to cut in a chunk that is neither the consumers or the firm. It's not Radiohead. It's going to. It's not necessarily related to the copyright in the sense that the company, the firm, here Radiohead, can still have the copyright without having a contract with the label. But many times the two are related. You sign a contract with the label, they give some cash in advance to the artist, and they start producing the disc. So they could or they could not be related. So yes, the middleman are going to be an important part in this particular market. But it's not necessarily related to the question that I was asking here. So forget for a second about the middleman. How does the fact that a firm has copyrights affect the market?
Is it that they're the only firm that's allowed to sell that, so they're the only supplier?
Exactly. Okay. So Radiohead is going to be the only firm that is going to sell in rainbows. You can argue, well, yeah, but there are many other albums. Okay, well, yeah, but for consumers that like Radiohead, okay, this is going to be the only. This is what the copyright says. That cannot be reproduced, and only buy it for the phone. So in that sense, Radiohead is going to be a monopoly. Okay, so this is the graph that I have done here. We have done this graph multiple times. A marginal revenue cost, marginal cost, and monopoly. So copyright is a form of patent. So we analyze this in our previous cases. Okay. So it's this is how this essentially was priced. Yes, I agree with the point by Ian that on top of this there's a middleman, and it's important in this industry. Okay, this is not represented in the graph. We're going to analyze the role of this middleman later on in the class when we analyze the dollar marginalization issue. So for a moment, just think about that part of this markup goes to the middle. Okay, so but they are not basically represented. So this was part A, that's from part A. And the reason why I wanted to do that is to go back to the original point by John about price discrimination. Okay, so think about now this market. Okay, you have this monopoly. Okay, so it's charging this price. This means that the only consumers that are buying are these consumers that are in this part of the demand. They want to have a valuation above this star. But what if I can also make these consumers pay a bit for this album? Okay, so consumers are heterogeneous, and consumers have a greater valuation for this album. You can have a lower valuation. You set a high price, then you lose all the consumers that pay below. And this was exactly what the first degree price discrimination or the perfect discriminating monopoly would do. Capture all the consumer surplus by charging different prices. So with this, find or set your own prices, okay, if it works well, and I think that you mentioned that, John, when you said in theory, you said in theory if it works well. Well, I will phrase it a bit differently. If consumers are willing to pay, okay, if, and it's a big if, okay, then they could implement some sort of price discrimination. Okay, it doesn't need to be perfect, okay, but this means that some consumer that has a low valuation might pay a low amount. Some consumers that maybe, so this you can think of to being the price of the cost of the typical CD at the moment, that was between $10 and $15. Okay, so some consumers pay much higher, some consumers pay lower, and this might contribute to increasing the profits of the firm. Okay. Who can give me another argument why profit might increase with this strategy?
So I know one thing, like let's say you have 15 and you're gonna set the album as a price of 15, then you may lose out on people that would maybe pay $10 for it. So if they put it up for whatever price you're willing to pay, then maybe all the Radiohead fans will pay $15 or maybe even more. But like I may buy it for $5 or $10, which is still some money, which they wouldn't have been getting before if it was a solid 15.
Right. And that's exactly what we have just. That's the argument about prices. That's exactly. That's right, and it's exactly the same.
So the marginal cost would be pretty low, right? Since they're selling digital copies.
Right.
So that just gives them more room.
So nowadays you might think that okay, selling things online and through iTunes or just digital copies, MP3s might be natural, or listening to music through Spotify is the natural thing to do. Back in the days, in 2007, it was not obvious. So people were producing CDs, people were buying CDs, they were listening to CDs in wherever they would listen to music. And yes, you can argue that the cost of producing a CD might be very low, okay? But producing just the digital content, the MP3 is even lower, okay? And it could be orders of magnitude lower. Okay? So it's just like the cost of maintaining the platform so that people can log in and upload. So it's much lower. So it's affecting the cost structure. Okay? And related to the points that Ian made before, okay, they cut the middle. So basically they don't need the record company to sell this. They can just put it in their own webpage. Any other ideas how this now could increase profits?
This may not be perfectly illustrated in the graph, but nowadays when you go on most websites there is ads. So by pricing making it being able to pay whatever you want, I would imagine that would increase web traffic to your website, and they could actually recruit that through ad revenue.
Yeah, they've been quite sophisticated, but you're right. Okay, so web stuff like that. Yeah, I thought. I mean, I'm saying that George would be a bit sophisticated because I believe that at that moment, in the 2007, this was not as common as it is nowadays. Nowadays, firms to have a gigantic firms like Facebook or Google do a great chunk of their revenues just by doing this advertising. So it's a big deal nowadays. So yes, true. And related to advertising, you can think just about the advertising that arises due to the fact that they were the first to do this type of pricing scheme successfully. Okay, when you do something successfully for the first time, you always get this, advertising to have it to be the first. Okay, that's what we are talking about. Radiohead in this case, and this in program business class. Okay, so they got this huge advertising event, and this might increase the demand. Okay, so here you have like a bunch of potential paths through which the profit might increase. Okay, obviously, and this is part C. Just put it here. So part C is asking you the opposite question: what could go wrong? What could draw profits down with this pricing scheme?
Well, without like the digital rights management software, like there's no way to prevent. I mean, like this is an extreme scenario, but like one person buys it and then just emails it to everyone. You can't prevent resale for like price discrimination.
Free.
I mean, they could even just download it for free because it said pay any price. So they could just not even have one person pay for it, I think. Just like going off of Eric's point.
Exactly. I mean, both points are valid. You can either go to the webpage and download it for free. Okay, so this is the free riding problem that I put here. Okay, if we think about consumers have been this rational, pure irrational individuals describing many of the textbooks. Okay, they're going to go there at the website and they want to say, yes, I have a very high valuation, but still, I don't like paying prices, so I'm going to pay zero. I'm going to download it, free ride it. But you can think about that single person just emailing to all their friends, sharing it through a USB. Okay, so this person will not even go to the website, so they don't get any ads or anything. Okay, so you can think there are several ways. So this is obviously a big problem, and that's why I say, okay, well, this is going to be an implementation of price discrimination if it worked properly and if consumers are willing to pay this. So it was another way of saying that if there is no free ride. Okay. And in part D, I asked you to, okay, what do you think that will happen in this industry? Is basically putting together B and C and thinking about which of the effects is going to dominate. So there's not a correct answer to that. You can say, well, I think that it's a great idea. It's going to allow some consumers to pay a bit more and to capture some consumers has a lower valuation. But at the end, I believe that the free riding problem is going to be too important and they are not going to be able to overcome it. That's fine. Or you can argue the opposite. No, you are very loyal to Radiohead. They are going to, their fans are willing to pay. Exactly, the demand is much higher, something like that. So they're going to pay very high prices. And then these fans that were not buying albums of Radiohead are going to listen to Radiohead. They're going to pay lower price for this album. They're going to start buying the other albums that they produced before. Therefore, they're going to get even higher profit. And that could be another valid answer. So there is not a right answer to that. It's just those things together. Okay. So, anything else? Any questions or comments?
So if they were able to perfectly price discriminate, then marginal revenue would just become the demand curve, right?
Correct.
So they would be able to make a profit until the marginal cost curve crossed the demand curve.
Yeah, and because here they are just selling through this platform, you can think about this marginal cost of being very, very low actually. Something, yeah. So because of allowing another person to download the MP3s is going to be trivial. Yes, the first say week or so, you're going to have a high demand in your web page, so you're going to have like a more potent server. But after that, it's just like having the web page and allow consumers to click. So the marginal cost is literally going to be close to zero. Okay, so yes, you're going to capture the whole demand if there's no this problem. More comments or questions?
So did they end up succeeding, or?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that was the final point. Well, they actually got the best of the two worlds. So they got all this because they were the first. They got some consumers paying more, some consumers less. But then people started to free ride it. So they decided, okay, well, we're going to stop doing this and we're going to go finally to the standard model. So they did it for a couple of months and they went to the standard model and they continued profiting from this. So they got the best of the two worlds. So that's another advantage of how you can be the first to doing someone. You can go, try, it doesn't work very well and go successful, then go back to the traditional model. More questions or comments? All right, so let's stop here. Okay, if you have any questions, you can send me an email or stop by office hours. For those of you who do not, have a great weekend and see you on Tuesday.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Professor, is it possible to ask a couple of questions now? I'm not able to come to office hours today, unfortunately, but I have some questions about the problem set. Or if there's another time later this week.
Can you give me a 10-minute break?
Yeah, sorry.
I can, or 5-minute break. I just need to sit down and then I'll have it to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So the usual office hour.
Let's do the following. Let's meet at 3:30.
Okay.
Okay, using the office hours link.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
The rest of you, if you want to join, I see you in like 8 minutes.
Okay, see you.